What's the most elaborate revenge plan someone organized from their deathbed? 3 days after Grandpa died, my parents arrived at my door with flowers and a business proposal. They wanted guardianship of my unborn baby. Turns out Grandpa had left behind a trust fund that paid $100,000 a year to whoever raised his great-grandchildren. My parents were claiming if I gave guardianship to them, we could all have access to it. It's a win-win. They smiled sweetly. They left after I told them I needed time to think. They waited exactly 3 days before going nuclear. I was making breakfast when Mom called crying, "The cancer is back at stage 4. Treatment is $80,000 a year and insurance won't cover it." 2 hours later, Annika showed up at my house. She snuck in using the spare key and put her hands on my belly before I could react. "I had to go through 7 years of pain," she whispered, her fingers spreading across my skin like she was claiming territory. 7 years of needles and failure and empty cribs. She swore that with the trust fund, she would give my baby everything I was stressed about. Private schools, college funds, a big backyard to play in. The baby kicked and I wondered if I was being selfish by keeping her. When you've been trained since birth to put family first, setting boundaries feels like betrayal. The breaking point came when Mom sent a photo of herself in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm. "Starting chemo tomorrow," the caption read. "I wish I could afford the treatment that actually works." I arrived to Granddad's funeral 3 weeks later with guardianship papers tucked in my purse. But as the last hymn ended and the funeral director cleared his throat, everything changed. He announced that our grandfather had left specific instructions for this moment. Suddenly, the screen behind the casket came to life, and there was a recording of Grandpa, propped up in his hospital bed and staring directly at the camera. "If my daughter Evelyn is perking up right now thinking this is about trust distributions," he said, and Mom's eager face shifted to confusion, "then everything is going according to plan. What none of you know," Grandpa continued, "is that I've been recording every conversation in my hospital room for the last 6 months, because I needed evidence." Mom started to stand. "This is ridiculous. Evelyn, sit down. Yes, you. I know you're standing right now about to claim I was senile." She froze mid-stand, then slowly sank back down. "You told my granddaughter your cancer returned. Stage 4, right? Experimental treatment that costs exactly what the trust pays annually? Creative math." Mom was frantically scrolling through her phone while Dad tried to grab it to see the documents himself. "Wesley, are you still claiming you're losing the house?" Dad spun toward the screen. "The house I paid off in 2008? The remortgage that went straight to Prairie Casino? I have the withdrawal records, Wesley. $400,000 in 18 months. Terrible blackjack player, by the way." Annika jumped up, already crying. He was clearly mentally compromised. Annika, right on schedule. Let me guess, you're about to cry about your infertility?" He chuckled to himself. "Your abortion was 14 months ago. $3,200 on my credit card," Annika screamed. "That's a vicious lie. Also, you're not infertile. You're on birth control. The pills are in your medicine cabinet behind the vitamins." The funeral home erupted. "Now," Grandpa's voice continued calmly, "my granddaughter, if you're holding guardianship papers right now, and I know you are because you always want the best for everyone, read page 4, subsection C out loud." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. "Permanent and irreversible transfer of parental rights. The guardianship was never meant to be permanent. Your mother's friend drafted those. Stand up, Joe." A man in the 5th row reluctantly stood, face bright red. Mom was shrieking. "Turn this off! He's destroying our family." "Evelyn, you're about to say I was always manipulative." 3, 2, 1. "He was always manipulative," she screamed. "Too predictable. Oh, and sweetheart?" His voice softened, addressing me. "Check under that pregnancy book I gave you." There was a USB, and in seconds, a recording of my mother's voice filled the funeral home. "When Dad dies, let's tell OP the cancer's back. She always caves when I cry." And here's the kicker. Grandpa's video continued over the chaos. "The trust can only be accessed by biological parents. Guardianship changes nothing. You exposed yourselves for money you could never touch." The funeral home turned into a battlefield. Family members screaming, Mom lunging for the screen, the funeral director calling security. I stood there ripping those guardianship papers into pieces. "One more thing," Grandpa's voice echoed for the last time. "About the trust money, I already put it in a locked account for the baby. Accessible only at 18, to the child directly. Oh, and Evelyn, if you're still watching this, your parking meter ran out 20 minutes ago." He kept going, and what he said next made my face drain of color. My mother's face went from angry to terrified. "Turn it off!" she screamed. "She doesn't need to know." And after I found out, I was ready to destroy them in the same way they destroyed me, but worse. The screen flickered, and Grandpa's face got serious as he pulled out a stack of bank statements. "Your mother has been stealing from your college fund since you turned 16. My legs went weak as the screen showed withdrawal after withdrawal from the account Grandma had set up for my education. Mom's hands were shaking as she grabbed Dad's arm and tried to pull him toward the exit. The funeral director moved to unplug the projector, but the cord was locked in a metal box with a timer that wouldn't open for another 10 minutes. $47,000 over 6 years. Grandpa's voice continued while the screen showed receipts from designer stores and luxury spas. Mom lunged at the screen screaming that the papers were fake, but the funeral director stepped in front of her with his arms spread wide. 2 security guards rushed in through the side door as Dad knocked over 3 huge flower arrangements trying to reach the USB drive on the podium. White roses and lilies scattered across the floor while people jumped back to avoid getting hit. The screen changed to show credit card applications, and my stomach dropped when I saw my own signature on documents I'd never seen before. Your mother opened 12 credit cards in your name when you turned 18, Grandpa explained calmly. The applications showed my social security number and birth date, but addresses I'd never lived at. Currently $30,000 in debt that you don't even know exists. My hands were frozen at my sides as relatives started shouting and pointing at Mom. Some cousins were defending her, saying Grandpa must have made this up, while others demanded she explain herself. Uncle Pete grabbed Mom's purse and dumped it on a pew looking for evidence while she screamed at him to stop. Aunt Sarah was filming everything on her phone while her husband tried to calm down the younger kids who were crying. I pushed through the chaos and grabbed the USB from the podium before anyone else could take it. The guardianship papers were still in my purse, and I stuffed them deeper inside to keep them safe. Mom's friend Joe tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away and headed for the exit. The funeral home doors burst open and cold air hit my face as I stumbled into the parking lot. Annika appeared from behind a car and grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. "You've ruined everything," she hissed with her face inches from mine. Her eyes were wild and her breath smelled like wine even though it was barely noon. "That baby should be mine and you know it." She pressed her other hand against my belly and I tried to push her away, but she was stronger than she looked. 7 years I tried for a baby, and you get pregnant by accident with some loser who left you. I finally broke free and ran toward my car while she chased after me screaming about how selfish I was. My hands fumbled with the keys as she caught up and started pounding on the driver's side window. Other funeral guests were pouring out of the building and some started filming while others tried to pull Annika away from my car. She was kicking the door and screaming that I stole her life while mascara ran down her face in black streams. 2 men finally dragged her back and I peeled out of the parking lot with my heart racing. That night I sat on my apartment floor with my laptop playing the USB Grandpa had left. The first video showed Mom and Dad in Grandpa's hospital room thinking he was asleep. "When he dies, we tell her the cancer's back," Mom said while checking her phone. "She always believes whatever I say when I cry." Dad laughed and said I was the perfect mark because I wanted their approval so badly. There were dozens of recordings showing them planning every detail of their fake emergencies. One video from 3 months ago showed them practicing Mom's cancer announcement in their kitchen. She rehearsed different ways of crying while Dad timed how long she could hold fake tears. Another recording showed them on the phone with Joe discussing how to make the guardianship papers look legitimate. They talked about me like I was just a bank account they could access whenever they needed money. The worst part started playing and I had to pause it twice because I couldn't breathe. Mom was laughing with her book club friends about her little ATM machine, who paid for their last vacation. "She actually thinks we're proud of her," Mom giggled while sipping wine. Dad's voice came through on a different recording where he told his golf buddy I was so desperate for love I'd sign anything. "We trained her from birth to put family first," he bragged. "Best investment we ever made." I ran to the bathroom and threw up until there was nothing left in my stomach. Not from the pregnancy, but from finally understanding that every hug and every proud smile had been fake. Every time they said they loved me, it was just to keep me useful and willing to give them money. The sun was coming up when I finally stopped crying and looked up attorneys in the yellow pages. The first one who handled fraud cases answered even though it was only 7 in the morning. I explained about the identity theft and forged documents while she took notes and gasped at each new detail. "Come to my office right now," she said after I finished. I grabbed my purse and drove straight there even though my hands were shaking. So bad I could barely grip the wheel. The attorney's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax place, and when I walked in she was already printing forms and making phone calls. She hung up and stared at the USB I handed her, then plugged it into her computer while I sat there watching her face change from professional to shocked to angry. She kept pausing the recordings to write notes, and after 20 minutes she looked up and told me this was one of the worst family fraud cases she'd seen in 15 years of practice. We spent the next 3 hours at the police station filing reports for identity theft and fraud, while she explained to the officers about the $30,000 in credit card debt Mom had racked up in my name. The detective took copies of everything and said they'd start investigating immediately, then helped me freeze my credit through all 3 bureaus right there in the station. By the time I got home, my phone had 47 missed calls from Mom, and over 100 texts that started with crying emojis and ended with threats to have me committed for mental illness. She kept saying the stress was making her cancer worse, and that I was killing her by not helping with treatment costs, even though Grandpa had just proved at the funeral that she never had cancer at all. The texts got worse overnight, with Mom sending pictures of herself looking pale and sick, though I noticed she'd used filters to make herself look worse and claiming she was vomiting blood from the stress I was causing. I turned off my phone, but she started calling my work number, leaving messages with the receptionist that I was having a mental breakdown and needed immediate psychiatric help. My boss pulled me aside the next morning to ask if everything was okay, because my mother had called 6 times before the office even opened, each time with a different emergency about why I needed to be sent home. I showed him some of the texts and explained the situation, and he immediately told security not to let her in the building and to document any attempts she made to enter. That afternoon, I changed my phone number and only gave it to my attorneys and my boss. But within 2 days, Mom had figured out where I lived and started showing up at my apartment complex. She told my neighbors I was mentally unstable and had stolen her life savings while she was dying of cancer, going door to door with fake medical papers she'd printed off the internet. The elderly couple next door stopped talking to me, and the mom with 3 kids started pulling them inside whenever she saw me coming. My apartment manager called me into his office and said Mom had spent 2 hours in there claiming I was dangerous and shouldn't be allowed to live around families with children. He didn't believe her because she kept changing her story about what exactly I'd done, but he suggested I should document everything for legal protection, and maybe consider getting security cameras for my door. I installed a doorbell camera that same day, and within hours it caught Mom trying to slip papers under my door that turned out to be fake psychiatric hold documents she'd downloaded and filled out herself. Meanwhile, Dad had found my work phone number and left 17 voicemails over 3 days claiming the casino was going to take the house and possibly break his legs if he didn't pay them back immediately. He said he owed them $200,000 and they were sending people to collect. Though when I listened carefully, I could hear slot machines in the background, so I knew he was calling from the casino itself. He left one message where he was actually crying and said he'd already sold everything valuable in the house, including Mom's jewelry, which made me wonder if she even knew about that part. The family law attorney I'd hired called me in to discuss the trust fund and spent an hour explaining how Grandpa had set it up specifically to protect it from people like my parents. The money could only be accessed by biological parents for the direct care and needs of the child, with strict oversight requiring receipts for every purchase and monthly reports to a trust administrator. She said Grandpa had added multiple safeguards, including requiring approval for any expense over $500 and automatic audits if spending patterns seemed suspicious. 3 days after that meeting, a certified letter arrived at my apartment from Joe, the lawyer who'd drafted the illegal guardianship papers. He was threatening to sue me for defamation and slander if I reported him to the Bar Association, claiming I was lying about his involvement and that the papers were perfectly legal when he wrote them. I drove straight to my attorney's office and she actually laughed when she read his threat, then called the Bar Association right there on speakerphone to file the complaint herself. She included evidence from Grandpa's recordings where Joe discussed with my parents how to make the guardianship papers look legitimate enough that I wouldn't question them, plus emails showing he knew the papers were fraudulent. She told me he'd probably lose his license and face criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud, and that his threat letter was just desperation, because he knew he was caught. While all this was happening, Annika had started a social media campaign on 3 different platforms, claiming I was denying her the chance to be a mother out of pure spite and jealousy. She'd broken into my apartment while I was at work using the spare key I'd forgotten she had, and stolen ultrasound photos from my dresser that she was now posting online pretending they were from her lost pregnancy that never actually existed. She wrote long posts about how she'd been trying for 7 years to have a baby, and how I was cruelly keeping her from her last chance at motherhood, tagging everyone we both knew and even people from my work that she'd found through my company's website. People who didn't know the real story started sending me hateful messages on every platform calling me heartless and selfish, and saying I should be ashamed of myself for denying an infertile woman the chance to raise a child. Some strangers found my work email through the company directory and sent emails to my boss demanding I be fired for being so cruel to a woman who just wanted to be a mother, with one person even claiming I was probably abusive to my unborn baby if I could be so heartless to others. My boss called me into her office the next morning and showed me the stack of printed emails, her face concerned but supportive as she assured me my job was safe and asked if I needed time off for my safety. I was explaining the situation when a sharp pain shot through my belly, and I doubled over, gripping the edge of her desk as another contraction hit harder than anything I'd felt before. She drove me to the hospital herself while I tried to breathe through waves of pain that kept coming every few minutes, my whole body shaking from the stress of everything that had happened. The doctor examined me and immediately put me on monitors, her face serious as she explained that I was having real contractions at only 32 weeks and needed to be admitted for observation. She gave me medication to stop the contractions and ordered complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks, documenting everything in my medical records, including notes about the harassment causing extreme stress to both me and the baby. I spent 3 days in the hospital before they let me go home with strict orders to stay in bed except for bathroom trips and weekly checkups, plus a prescription for medication to prevent more contractions. My boss arranged for me to work from home on light duties, sending flowers and a care package while HR documented everything in case we needed evidence of the damage my family was causing. I was lying in bed checking emails when my attorney called with news that made me sit up too fast, triggering another contraction that left me gasping. Mom had been arrested that morning after the police investigation uncovered 12 credit cards she'd opened in my name over the past 5 years, with a total debt of $47,000. The detective said they'd found the applications in her email with my forged signature, and evidence she'd been intercepting my mail to hide the statements, using the cards for shopping sprees and cash advances. She was charged with identity theft, fraud, and mail tampering, but somehow made bail within 3 hours using money from an account the police couldn't trace yet. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived that my neighbor brought up since I couldn't go downstairs, and inside was a 3-page letter from Mom covered in biblical quotes about honoring thy father and mother. She'd included photos of herself looking thin and pale in what looked like a hospital gown, though I noticed the designer purse on the table behind her and fresh manicure on her hands. The letter said God would punish me for abandoning her in her time of need, and that my baby would suffer for my sins, with highlighted passages from Exodus and Deuteronomy about children who disobey their parents. My attorney immediately called the prosecutor to report the bail violation since Mom wasn't supposed to contact me directly or indirectly, and they issued a warrant for her arrest. I was trying to rest when someone knocked on my door, and through the peephole I saw a woman in business clothes holding a folder with the state seal on it. She introduced herself as a Child Protective Services worker and said they'd received a report that I was planning to harm my baby and needed to investigate immediately. My hands shook as I let her in, explaining about the bed rest and showing her my medical papers while she looked around my apartment, checking the nursery I'd set up and the baby supplies I'd bought. She seemed skeptical of the allegations from the start, especially when I showed her the restraining order paperwork and explained about the trust fund and my family's attempts to get custody. I gave her my doctor's number and my employer's contact information, plus printed copies of all the harassment I'd documented, while she took notes and photos of everything. She examined my medical records showing proper prenatal care and the stress-related complications, then called my doctor right there to verify everything I'd told her. The worker said she could tell this was retaliation, and promised to close the case quickly, but warned me that multiple reports had been filed, so other workers might visit too. Sure enough, 2 more CPS workers came by over the next week, each one reaching the same conclusion that the reports were false and vindictive. Meanwhile, Dad had his own problems when he got arrested at the grocery store for trying to cash a stolen check for $800, the third one he'd tried that week according to the detective who called me. The store security footage showed him arguing with the cashier when they questioned the check, then trying to run when they called the manager, only to trip over a display and knock down an entire shelf of canned goods. He called me from jail 15 times in 2 hours, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails about how it was all a misunderstanding, and he just needed $5,000 for bail. His public defender called me the next day, asking if I'd testify about his gambling addiction as a mitigating factor in his sentencing, saying it might help reduce his charges if the judge understood he had a problem. I told her I couldn't help him, that I was on bed rest with a high-risk pregnancy and needed to focus on my health and safety, not on saving someone who'd tried to steal my baby for money. She said she understood and would proceed without my testimony, though she warned that Dad was facing serious time with his previous record of bad checks and theft charges I didn't even know about. 3 days later, my trust attorney called with news that made my blood run cold, saying Mom and Dad had tried to access the trust directly by submitting forged documents to the bank, claiming I had died in childbirth. They'd created a fake death certificate and medical records, even a forged letter from a doctor confirming my death, but the bank's fraud department caught it because the doctor they'd named didn't exist. The bank had immediately reported it to federal authorities since it involved interstate wire fraud, adding serious federal charges to their growing list of crimes. Around the same time, Annika's husband filed for divorce after seeing Grandpa's funeral video that someone had posted online, finally learning about the abortion she'd hidden and all her lies about being infertile. She went on every social media platform blaming me for destroying her marriage, posting long rants about how I'd spread vicious lies even though everyone at the funeral had heard Grandpa's recording with their own ears. Her husband's attorney contacted me for a statement, but I just sent him a copy of the funeral video and the receipts Grandpa had saved from the abortion clinic. The final straw came when my apartment manager called to say maintenance had found Mom trying to break into my unit while I was at a prenatal appointment, using a credit card to jimmy the lock. The security footage showed her trying for 20 minutes before giving up and kicking my door hard enough to leave a dent, then walking around to my bedroom window to peer inside. The complex immediately installed extra cameras on my floor and changed my locks again, with the manager promising to press charges for attempted breaking and entering. The stress was eating me alive, so I finally made an appointment with a therapist my doctor recommended. She had a small office with too many plants and a box of tissues on every surface, but something about her made me feel safe enough to talk. I told her everything about the funeral video and the guardianship papers, and how Mom had been stealing from my college fund for years. She listened without interrupting, then helped me see that none of this was my fault, and that protecting my baby had to come first no matter what. 2 weeks after starting therapy, I got a call from the prosecutor handling Mom's case saying her trial was set for 2 months out. He warned me right away that her lawyer was already filing delays claiming she was too sick to appear in court. The prosecutor had seen this trick 100 times and said these cases could drag on for years with lawyers using every trick in the book to avoid trial. I started finding dead flowers on my doorstep every morning with notes calling me a murderer and baby killer. The security cameras my apartment complex installed were too grainy to make out who was leaving them, but I recognized the handwriting from birthday cards over the years. It was definitely Annika, even though she'd tried to disguise it by writing with her left hand. My doctor took one look at the stress I was under and recommended I deliver at a different hospital under a fake name for safety. She was genuinely worried my family would try to interfere with the birth, or even attempt to take the baby right from the hospital nursery. She'd already contacted the other hospital to set up special security protocols for my delivery. My family law attorney filed the restraining order paperwork against Mom and Dad and Annika the next day. The judge took one look at the evidence, including the funeral video and the forged documents and the harassment, and granted temporary orders immediately. They couldn't come within 500 feet of me or my home or workplace until the hearing. 3 weeks later at the restraining order hearing, Mom showed up in a wheelchair she definitely didn't need, gasping dramatically for air between words. She kept clutching her chest and moaning about her heart condition that I knew for a fact she didn't have. The judge wasn't buying any of it, and made the restraining orders permanent, warning her that any violation would mean immediate jail time, no questions asked. The local newspaper picked up Dad's arrest story and ran it on the front page with all the details about his casino debts. His employer saw the article and fired him that same day, citing their zero-tolerance policy for employees with gambling problems who handled company finances. Without his job, he lost his health insurance, making his situation even more desperate than before. My phone started ringing nonstop with calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all demanding their share of Grandpa's money. Mom had been telling everyone I was keeping his entire estate for myself, not just the trust fund for the baby. These people were screaming at me about fairness and family loyalty, while demanding money that didn't even exist, since Grandpa had only left the trust for the baby and nothing else. The bank investigating the forged loan documents made another discovery that made my stomach turn. Mom had taken out a second mortgage on my grandmother's house 6 months after Grandma died using forged signatures and fake documents. Since Grandma had left that house to me in her will, this was another felony fraud charge on top of everything else Mom was already facing. I was at work trying to focus on spreadsheets when I heard screaming from the lobby. Annika had somehow gotten past security and was shrieking that I stole her baby and ruined her life. My coworkers rushed me into the supply closet and locked the door while someone called security to restrain her. I could hear her throwing things and screaming threats through the door saying she'd make me pay for destroying her marriage. Security finally got her under control, and the police arrested her for violating the restraining order. She kept screaming the whole time they dragged her out that the baby was supposed to be hers, and I had no right to keep what was meant for her. My boss gave me the rest of the week off and offered to let me work from home until things calmed down. The police said Annika would be held without bail until her hearing since she'd proven she couldn't follow court orders. They also increased patrols around my apartment and workplace, though we all knew that wouldn't stop someone really determined to get to me. The therapist helped me work through the guilt I felt about Annika getting arrested, even though she'd brought it on herself. We talked about how I'd been trained since childhood to take responsibility for everyone else's emotions and actions. She pointed out that Annika chose to violate the restraining order and chose to come to my workplace, and that those were her decisions, not mine. Every session helped me get a little stronger and a little better at recognizing that their choices weren't my fault. The prosecutor called to update me on Mom's case, saying her lawyer had filed 3 more delays claiming everything from heart problems to mental incompetence. He was fighting each one, but warned me to prepare for a long legal battle that could take years to fully resolve. 2 weeks into waiting for court dates and dealing with lawyers, the stress hit me like a truck when I woke up with cramping so bad I couldn't stand. My water broke on the bathroom floor at 34 weeks and I called 911 while trying not to panic about the baby coming too early. The EMTs loaded me into the ambulance and one of them asked if there was anyone they should call. But when I explained about the restraining orders and my family trying to steal my baby, they radioed ahead to warn hospital security. The ride felt like forever, with contractions hitting every 3 minutes and me gripping the gurney rails so hard my knuckles went white. They wheeled me straight up to labor and delivery, where the nurses had already been briefed about my situation and promised nobody on the banned list would get near me. 6 hours into labor, a nurse rushed in saying security had caught someone in maintenance coveralls trying to get into my room. They dragged Dad out to the hallway where I could hear him yelling that he had a right to see his grandchild being born. The police showed up within minutes and arrested him for violating the restraining order and criminal trespass, adding more charges to his growing list. My daughter came into the world at 4 pounds, 2 ounces, her cry weak but determined as they whisked her straight to the NICU for monitoring. The next week blurred together with me sitting beside her incubator, watching her tiny chest rise and fall while nurses checked every single visitor against the security list. The NICU had its own keypad entry and cameras everywhere, which made me feel safer knowing nobody could sneak in to see her. On day 3, a nurse showed me her phone where someone had posted my daughter's photo on a fundraising site, claiming to need money for a sick grandchild's medical bills. The photo was from the hospital's newborn photography service that somehow Mom had gotten access to, and people had already donated $8,000 before the site got reported and taken down. The hospital's social worker helped me file reports with the fundraising platforms and document everything for the ongoing legal cases. While we were still in the NICU, the CPS worker called to say they were closing their investigation after finding 0 evidence to support the claims against me. She actually wrote in her report that the allegations appeared to be clear retaliation for me refusing to give up custody, and she recommended I keep all protective orders in place. When it was finally time to take my daughter home, hospital security walked us out through the loading dock area, while another guard watched the main entrance for any of my family members. We took 3 different turns on the way home, and I kept checking the mirrors to make sure nobody was following us. That first night in my apartment, I checked every lock 4 times and put a chair against the door, jumping at every sound from the hallway or the street outside. The baby slept in a bassinet right next to my bed, but I barely closed my eyes, terrified that someone would find a way in despite all the precautions. By morning, I knew this was no way to live, and called my attorney to discuss taking more aggressive action against my family. She filed civil suits that afternoon against Mom, Dad, and Annika for intentional infliction of emotional distress, harassment, and defamation. We were asking for damages to cover all my medical costs from the stress-induced premature birth, the security systems I'd had to install, and ongoing therapy to deal with the trauma. The attorney said we had an excellent case given all the documentation and criminal charges already filed against them. 3 months passed with various legal proceedings moving forward, when Joe's disbarment hearing finally happened. The Bar Association revoked his license immediately, and the prosecutor charged him with multiple felonies including conspiracy and fraud. Facing serious prison time, Joe made a deal to testify against my parents, and handed over boxes of documents showing other scams they'd run over the years. His testimony revealed that Mom had been stealing from elderly clients at her job, and Dad had been writing bad checks all over town to cover gambling debts. The prosecutor added these new charges to their cases, making it clear they were looking at significant prison time. Mom's trial date arrived 6 months after the funeral, and I sat in the courtroom watching her try to look frail and sick for the jury. The prosecutor systematically destroyed her defense, presenting the forged credit cards, the fake cancer claims, the fraudulent loan documents, and testimony from multiple witnesses, including Joe. When they played the recording of her planning to lie about cancer to manipulate me, several jury members shook their heads in disgust. The jury came back after just 2 hours with guilty verdicts on all counts of identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The The judge called her actions despicable and sentenced her to 5 years in state prison, though the prosecutor warned me she'd probably get out in 3 with good behavior. Mom screamed that I'd destroyed our family as the bailiffs led her away in handcuffs, but I just sat there holding my daughter and feeling nothing but relief. Dad's trial was supposed to happen 2 weeks later, but his lawyer called me that morning saying he wanted to make a deal. The prosecutor's office had him meet us in a small conference room where Dad sat looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his hands shaking as he signed the plea agreement for 3 years probation and mandatory gambling addiction treatment. He had to pay restitution too, but we all knew his pockets were empty, and the court would be lucky to get $50 a month from him. The judge made him stand there while she read out all his crimes, check fraud and identity theft, and violating the restraining order, and Dad just nodded and said yes to everything without looking up once. Annika's sentencing happened the next month, and she showed up to court in a wheelchair she didn't need, crying about how she'd lost everything because of me. The judge wasn't buying it and gave her 6 months in jail plus mandatory psychiatric treatment, saying her obsession with my baby showed clear mental health issues that needed professional help. Her lawyer tried to argue for house arrest, but the prosecutor showed security footage of her trying to break into the maternity ward, and that shut down any sympathy real quick. With all 3 of them finally facing consequences, something inside me loosened up, and I could actually breathe for the first time in months. My daughter was growing fast, rolling over and laughing at everything, and I found myself enjoying those middle-of-the-night feedings instead of dreading them. My boss had been amazing through everything and let me come back part-time, working from home 3 days a week so I could be with the baby. The other moms at work threw me a late baby shower since I'd missed having one before, and it felt good to have normal problems again, like finding the right daycare. The trust fund finally kicked in after all the paperwork cleared, and suddenly I had more money than I'd ever seen in my bank account. I hired a financial advisor who specialized in trust management, and she helped me set up college savings and investment accounts so my daughter would never have to worry about money. We found a new apartment in a building with actual security guards and key fob entry, 2 bedrooms on the 5th floor with a view of the park. Moving day was chaos with the baby crying and boxes everywhere, but it felt like starting fresh in a place where nobody knew our story. 6 months after giving birth, I was sorting mail when I found a letter from the women's prison with Mom's name on it. My hands shook as I opened it and read her rambling about finding God and wanting my forgiveness, complete with Bible verses and promises that she'd changed. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away either. Just filed it with all the other legal documents in case I ever needed proof of her attempts to contact me. A month later, Dad's probation officer called to say he had a letter for me from Dad, who'd finished his gambling program and wanted to apologize. The letter was short, just saying he was sorry and hoped the baby was healthy. No requests for money or visits or anything else. He was working on himself, the officer said, and hadn't missed a single group therapy session or failed any drug tests. I started taking the baby to swim classes at the community center, mostly to get out of the apartment and meet other parents. There was this guy there with twin boys who always helped me get the car seat out of the pool area, and after a few weeks he asked if we wanted to get coffee after class. His name was Mike, and his wife had left him with the twins when they were newborns, so he understood complicated family situations without me having to explain everything. We took it slow, just coffee and playground dates with the kids, and he never pushed for more than I was ready to give. He'd text me funny videos during night feedings and bring soup when the baby was sick, just being there without making it weird. A year after everything exploded at the funeral, I was grocery shopping when someone called my name, and I turned to see Annika's ex-husband pushing a cart with a toddler in the seat. He thanked me for showing him who his wife really was, said the abortion and lies would have stayed hidden forever if not for Grandpa's video. He'd remarried someone from his church, and they'd adopted this little boy, and he looked happier than I'd ever seen him during family gatherings. My daughter took her first steps on a Tuesday morning, pulling herself up on the coffee table and taking 3 wobbly steps before falling on her butt and laughing. That same afternoon, my lawyer called to say Mom had been released early for good behavior and was required to register her address with the court. The restraining order was still active and would be for another 2 years, and I'd already moved without leaving any forwarding address, so she had no way to find us. Dad had been staying clean according to his probation officer, working at a warehouse loading trucks and living in a halfway house for recovering addicts. He'd started sending child support through the court system, just $100 a month, but it came steady without him ever trying to contact me directly. The checks came with no notes or messages, just the official paperwork, and I actually respected him for keeping that distance and doing what the court ordered without trying to manipulate the situation. 2 months later, my phone started blowing up with notifications from random accounts following me on Instagram, and I knew something was wrong when I saw usernames like BabyLover847 and WatchingAlways22 trying to add me. The profile pictures were all generic stock photos, but the accounts had been created within minutes of each other, and they were all trying to view my private stories where I posted pictures of my daughter. My lawyer called that afternoon to tell me Annika had been released from psychiatric hold 3 weeks ago, and was supposed to be staying away from all social media as part of her parole conditions. Within an hour, we had screenshots of all the fake accounts traced back to the same IP address at the halfway house where she was living, and by dinner time, the police had arrested her for violating parole. The parole officer said she'd been obsessing over my daughter in group therapy sessions, and drawing pictures of babies with my daughter's name written hundreds of times across the pages. They sent her back to jail for another 6 months, and added stricter mental health requirements for when she got out again, but everyone knew she wasn't getting better. 3 weeks after that mess, I had to put on my only nice dress and drive to the courthouse to testify at Joe's criminal trial, where he sat at the defense table looking 20 pounds thinner with dark circles under his eyes. The prosecutor had me describe how he came to my apartment with the guardianship papers and tried to convince me they were standard documents when really they would have given my parents permanent custody of my baby. I told the jury about finding out he'd done this to 3 other young mothers in town and how he'd been getting kickbacks from adoptive parents for years. His lawyer tried to make me look like I was confused or lying, but the prosecutor had copies of all the forged documents with his signature and bank records showing deposits from my parents right after he drafted the papers. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict him on all charges, and the judge gave him 7 years in state prison, plus he lost his law license forever. Walking out of that courthouse, I saw him being led away in handcuffs and felt nothing but relief that he couldn't hurt any more families. My therapist had been working with me for months on processing everything, and one day she suggested I write a letter for my daughter to read when she's older, explaining why she doesn't have grandparents like other kids. We spent 3 sessions working on it with me crying through most of them as I tried to find the right words to explain that sometimes protecting someone means keeping them away from family. I wrote about how love isn't supposed to come with conditions or manipulation, and how I chose to break the cycle of abuse that had been going on for generations. The letter talked about how her great-grandpa loved her enough to protect her before she was even born, and how real family is about actions, not just blood. I sealed it in an envelope and put it in a safety deposit box for when she's old enough to understand why I made the choices I did. Around the same time, relatives I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out through Facebook and email saying they were sorry for believing my parents' lies about me stealing Grandpa's money. Apparently, word had gotten around about the trials and arrests, and people finally understood that Grandpa's video at the funeral had been telling the truth about everything. Some cousins sent long apologies about not standing up for me, and an aunt admitted she suspected Mom was lying but didn't want to get involved. I thanked them all for reaching out but kept my responses short and didn't accept any invitations to family gatherings because I'd learned that just sharing DNA with someone doesn't mean you owe them space in your life. 3 years passed without any contact from Mom or Dad, though I knew from court records that Mom had been released and was living 2 states away, and Dad was still sending his monthly child support checks through the system. My daughter grew into this happy little kid who made friends everywhere we went and had no idea about all the drama that happened before she could remember. I'd used the trust money to go back to the school for nursing while she was in daycare, and managed to graduate with honors despite being a single mom. The graduation ceremony was on a sunny May afternoon, and my daughter sat in the front row wearing a tiny cap and gown the school gave her, clapping and yelling, "That's my mommy!" when I walked across the stage. My classmates had become like family to us, and they all cheered extra loud knowing how hard I'd worked to get there. 2 months after graduation, I got a job offer at a hospital in a city 8 hours away, where nobody knew our story and we could truly start fresh. We packed up our apartment, and I let my daughter pick the color for her new bedroom in the little house I rented near a good elementary school. She started preschool that fall and came home every day chattering about her new friends and her teacher, and the class hamster named Mr. Whiskers. Watching her play on the swings in our backyard one evening while the sun set behind the trees, I thought about everything Grandpa had done to protect us, and realized his greatest gift wasn't the money in that trust fund. It was showing me the truth about my family, and giving me the courage to walk away and build something better for my daughter. We were creating the kind of loving, stable home I never had growing up, where honesty mattered more than appearances, and love didn't come with strings attached. That's everything I wanted to share. It's always about leaving you with something to think about, not just a story. Subscribe if you'd like more practical takeaways.